Dearest listeners,
Book babes and book bros.
welcome to Book Babble. I'm Rachel,
And I'm Tanya, and we're the Witlet Women, your hosts for the day.
and today we have a special guest appearance. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Meredith Kasian. I'm a romantic fantasy author. My debut novel, The Wielder's Discovery, came out at the end of 2024.
Well, Meredith, thank you so much for joining us today. We're excited to talk to you about your book and get a few, more tidbits about you as well. So without further ado, are you ready to babble?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
Alrighty, I will put 5 minutes on the clock.
All right. So my first question is almost always, what inspired you to write these stories?
This one in particular had a very distinct inspiration point. I remember when I was starting to plot out this book, one of the key news events at the time was actually a prisoner who had escaped from a local jail. And there was a 2 week long manhunt as people were searching for him. There were clues left all over the place about where he was. And I was just totally enraptured by this case. And so it got my brain spinning, as mine tends to do, and just thinking about, why would he have tried to escape? Who would he be trying to meet? Who would he be trying to find? And why? And so that's ultimately where the idea for the Wielder's Discovery was born.
So, okay, I love that. I'm gonna change my question that I was gonna ask. How did you tie in fantasy to that? So you took like that real world situation and morphed it into fantasy.
Yeah, so fantasy has always been where I've leaned into when I write. I don't only read fantasy, but I've been writing stories for as long as I can remember, and I've always leaned into fantasy. So I took that idea and I thought, I asked myself all those questions, but I tried to give the answers from a fantasy realm. So is there something magical that has happened to him, or what was the crime that he was in prison for, and how could I relate that to magic or some kind of fantasy world? What type of creatures live in this world? Is it just humans with magic? Is there also fae, elves, whatever it is? And so that's kind of how I started to weave in those fantastical elements.
That's amazing. I love that connection.
Yeah, it was a very distinct time. I love when people ask me that question because I feel like I have a very fun answer to it.
Yes.
I'm very excited about that answer. So with thinking about that, what is your process for writing? Because you're weaving in all of the true crime and the fantasy components, and so you kind of already started to talk about that. But what is your process?
I am very much a plotter, although I have found as I've written the sequel and now a novella for the same series that I pants a little bit more than I initially thought. But before I sat down to write anything with the Wielder's Discovery, I had notes of the map of the world, the key players of the story and their backgrounds, the different types of magic and how you could get them or who could get them. I am an engineer by background, and so I always want to weave in science. And so there's some scientific elements to this. So how can we weave in science and magic, and how does that fit into this world? And so I did a lot of the background of that before I ever even put words to paper. But I also then had a chapter by chapter outline, which ended up very different because originally it was 27 chapters and it turned out to be somewhere in the 50s. I actually don't remember how many chapters are in it now. But things change along the way, characters change along the way, but having that solid foundation is what really helped me get through the story from start to finish.
Can you expand on the amount of research that goes into this? Like you've referenced your engineer background, true crime. How much time do you actually spend on researching that stuff?
The fun thing about fantasy is that the research side is more digging into my own brain or reading other fantasy stories and figuring out which elements I like and I might want to become inspired from. And so the research side for this is less about the digging through textbooks and websites and things like that, and more about just delving into my own mind and allowing my brain the time to really brainstorm and think and wander, and figure out where I want the story to go. So for the Wielder's Discovery, I think I'd spent about 6 to 8 weeks diving into the background of everything before I started actually writing it. And that includes time
Wow.
for the outline as well. Obviously, when I wrote the sequel, I didn't need that long because the world was already formed. And so it was really maybe 2 weeks of plotting and figuring out what I wanted to happen before I started writing. But the world building part for sure takes a little bit of time to make sure you get the mechanics of it right.
You are so thorough with your planning. It's amazing.
It's part of what I love about it. And I'm a planner. Like, and I'm an engineer, but I'm a project manager in that role. So the planning part of it is just, it's part of my core being.
And we only have 30 seconds left, so this might be one that kind of drags us over, but I'm so curious. So your background's in engineering and then you're writing these books. What caused that shift in wanting to add in writing to your career as well? Because that's huge.
Yeah, but like I said, I've been writing for as long as I can remember, like all the way back to grade school, going over to my next door neighbor's house, and we would scribble stories together on notebook paper and pass them back and forth to read. I've been a reader as long as I can remember too, and so it's always been a dream of mine to finish a story and to get it out there. And so I finally did it, and now I've caught the bug, and there's no stopping me now.
I love that. As someone who has
Awesome.
like a background that's outside of reading as well, and it's not necessarily science, but a lot of research based in what I do,
Mhm.
seeing somebody who's also has that creative mindset as well is really inspiring. So that's really
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't have to have that like English language or literature background or even like an editorial background to get into writing. It can really be anybody. Very cool.
Exactly. Yeah, that is exactly right. Well, Meredith, congratulations. You made it through our 5 minute
Yay.
AMA. So we will put this on our social channels like Instagram, TikTok, and then the full interview is going to go on YouTube and Spotify. So we'll just keep chatting.
Sounds
Um,
great.
One thing that we did not hit on in our 5 minute AMA, which I'm glad about this, is advice that you have for aspiring authors. What, like any type of advice, any trial and error things that you've been through that you would like to share? What are those?
Yeah, there's so many pieces to it. As anybody who has tried to publish a book has probably realized, there's a lot more that goes into it than you initially think. Everything from like editing to cover design to ISBNs, what platforms you're going to use, how you're going to price your book. My biggest piece of advice whenever I start talking to a new author who really wants to publish their first book is to not rush into it. Make sure you do all your homework, make sure you give yourself enough time, because you just don't know how long things are going to take. And sometimes they go much quicker than you think they will, but sometimes they take a lot longer. For example, when I was working on the Wielder's Discovery, developmental edits and edits after beta readers took a lot longer than I anticipated. So when I was planning out the timeline for the sequel, I gave myself a lot longer. What I didn't account for is the fact that I've grown as a writer since then. And so the edits that needed to happen were actually fewer. So now I'm a little bit ahead of schedule. So it's all about trial and error in your own way and figuring out what works for you, but making sure that you give yourself enough time to figure out all of those little pieces and to get it right, or as right as you can the first time, because everybody's going to obviously run into little things along the way. There's just too many moving parts of the
Yeah.
process to not. But the other thing that I always tell people is to not be afraid to ask questions to other authors. One thing that I found is that there are a ton of authors out there who are maybe just a book ahead of you, maybe 5 or 10 books ahead of you, but they're all so willing to answer your questions. Nobody gatekeeps in the indie author world, and everybody wants to uplift and support each other. So reaching out, whether that's through social media or if you've connected with them maybe on Discord or email, and asking them questions that everybody's always very happy to answer.
What have you found is the best resource as an indie author?
The number one resource that I always recommend is the self-publishing authors. Oh gosh, I wish I remembered what it was actually called. M.K. Williams is an indie author. She's self-published a ton of books, both fiction and nonfiction. She has a whole series called Author Your Ambition, and there's a series of books in there. One's about self-publish. Oh, it's self-publishing for the first-time author is what it's called. She also has a book on book marketing. She has a workbook on all of the things that you need to do to self-publish your book for the first time, and like fill it out. I've purchased almost all of her nonfiction books, and I have like followed them to a T. She's also one of the ones who's super reachable and accessible via social media. And I've also done a Zoom call like this with her before as well. So her book, I recommend it to everybody, and everybody's always like, "This is amazing. This is such a good resource," because it has everything in there from editing to design to all the logistics behind publishing with barcodes and ISBNs. It talks about a little bit of the marketing side as well. Podcasts is one of the things that she mentions in there as well, just like this. And so it's it's such a good resource because it's short. It's only about this long, but it really touches on all of your bases to make sure that you're going to hit as much of it as you can.
Wow. And you have mentioned barcodes and ISBNs. As someone who reads a lot, like I see them, but that's not something that I ever would have considered. So
No.
I love that we've touched on this because who else is going to think about that at the beginning of their writing journey? Not many people.
No, and that's why it's often those are the things that are forgotten about until the end. And then somebody's getting ready to publish and they're like, oh, wait, I need an ISBN. And there are free ISBNs you can get out there. So if you're publishing on Amazon, they will give you a free ISBN, but you don't own that. And so if you ever wanted to really own that ISBN and say you are the true owner of this book, you really should own your own ISBN. And so there's only one place in the US that you can go and actually purchase your ISBN. So if you want it, there's only one place to go and get it. They're not the cheapest, but it is worth having that and making sure that you have true ownership of your book.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, Rachel, I keep taking all the time. I will let
You're
you speak.
okay. I was like, oh, well, never mind. So you
Sorry.
mentioned something earlier, and I really loved it, but it was like that no one in the indie author world gatekeeps.
Mhm.
And you seem very passionate about being an indie author. What drew you to being independently published versus going through mainstream publishing?
Part of it was just that I did not have the time to deal with querying and waiting. I wanted to get my book out there. I actually never initially thought that I would try to really push it as much as I have been. I thought that I'd publish it and I'd say, hey, look, I published a book. Isn't that cool? But like I said earlier, I caught the bug. And now here we are, making a true side hustle out of it. But yeah, oh my goodness, I lost my train of thought. What was the initial question now?
What drew you to being an
Oh
indie author?
yes,
Yeah.
indie author. So yeah, but I have two little kids, two toddlers at home. I have a full-time job outside of this, and so for me, it was just wanting to get it out there, wanting to get it published, seeing it being done so successfully by so many other people out there, that I just didn't have the patience or the time to wait for the query process.
That is one of the longest processes that I have ever heard of.
Yes.
It can be. So
Yeah.
kudos to you
Yeah.
for finding a workaround.
Yeah. And who knows, someday maybe it could happen. There are indie authors who get picked up to be traditionally published, and there's some that just make a career out of being indie authors. And so either way is great. Everybody has their own path that works for them. So obviously not trying to say that indie is the only way to go. I read both indie and traditionally published books, and I support both types of authors. But it's about finding which path works best for you.
Mhm.
Yeah, that makes sense. Rachel, what else? I'll let you keep
Oh
talking.
no, I was paying attention to the time. We only have a little bit left, so I was going to open it up and see if Meredith, if you had anything you wanted to say to the readers or to the listeners.
Oh gosh. I don't think I do. So I guess if we want to ask another question, I know I'm sorry I give long-winded answers apparently too, because I feel like we haven't gotten through as many questions as you might normally get through, but it's been fun to chat for sure.
It's been good
No, I
information.
mean we've
Yeah.
gotten through quite a bit and you've had so much good information. Like I love that our podcast is both um a resource for readers to discover new books, but also for authors to learn new things about the indie publishing process. So, and you've given so many insightful answers on that today. Like I'm blown away. I didn't realize how much went into it. So
A lot.
I'm just
Yes.
shocked.
Most people don't. That's why it's fun to like talk about it because a lot of people
Yeah.
just don't realize all the work that goes on behind the scenes. You see the content on social media, you hear podcasts like these where the authors actually get to come and talk, but there's so much more that goes into actually putting that product out there.
Well, and
Yeah.
how are you balancing that? Because you're a mother and you have a full-time job, and then now this what you call a side hustle, which is really like so much work behind it too. So how do you balance all of your stuff?
My alarm goes off at 5 a.m. every day.
Oh wow.
I do a lot of my writing and my editing and my author stuff in the mornings, or in the evenings after my kids go to bed. I also do a lot while they're doing their like quiet time or nap time on the weekends. But it's tough. I could be doing my work a lot faster and probably to a certain extent better if I had more time, if I didn't have to work my full-time job. But it's fun. I enjoy it, so it doesn't necessarily feel like work. having to find those times to squeeze it in. I'm an early bird too, so waking up at 5 a.m. while not ideal, it doesn't bother me as much as it would bother other people. I'm by 9 p.m. I'm like, no, I'm ready for bed anyways.
That's amazing. I have a lot of people ask me similar things like, how do you do all of your social media stuff? How do you run your PR company and everything? And it's just like, if you feel passionate enough about it, it doesn't feel like a job.
Mhm. Yeah, and there's other things that I've obviously had to give up to make that happen. I do not really watch any TV. So that, I know a lot of people will spend their free time watching TV and trying to catch up on other shows, and I would prefer to be spending it writing, editing, or even reading. And so that's just how I choose to spend my time, while others may choose to spend it in a different way.
Fair enough.
You sound just like us.
Yeah.
Well, Meredith, it has been so fun having you on. We are at time. I do hope to have you on again soon. So look
It would
to
be great.
your invites for that. And thank you again so much for joining us.
It's been super fun. Thanks for having me. Love chatting with you guys.
This is
Yes,
great.
have a good one.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.